بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So brothers and sisters, students of knowledge, ulama, welcome to this hastily put together event. So just for the sake of a bit of background, the way these things happen is really through the Tullab and, for short, the Tullab Al-Ilm Telegram group. That's kind of how it's been happening. So I got this idea to set up a Telegram group for students of knowledge. Really, it was a way for me to engage with younger Sharia graduates, particularly Darul Uloom graduates, because I'm engaging a lot with people who are kind of my generation, my age group, or older, sort of experienced Sharia graduates. And I felt that, so I kind of asked around, and then it turned out nothing like this existed. So I thought, okay, let's set something up. So I did, but I set it up as a kind of, as part of my work, which, if you don't know, is basically Mawarid Lifestyle, which is an online Islamic lifestyle and Islamic education platform. So that's kind of how, and so we kind of generate ideas for events and little webinars and discussions and things like that. And then we have a Zoom session, and for the sake of privacy and security, we have this registration system. So, and it's been good. I think the last one, the Shamila one, was really well attended. This one, I can't remember what triggered it, but I think somebody asked questions on the group, right? Or we had a chat about it, and then we thought, oh, okay, why not have a conversation about this as well? So that's kind of how this came about. So Jazakumullah khairan for attending. This isn't a careers event. I want to be clear from the outset, and I did hastily put together some slides just to manage my thoughts a little bit, so I'll share those with you, inshallah. So really what I want to do is talk to you and maybe have some discussion, take some questions. If there's any specific advice that anybody would like about themselves, then let's do that as part of Q&A. I'm happy to do that. That is one of the things that I'd like to do. But I'm not necessarily laying out every single career option as a careers advisor. That's not my intent anyway. If anything, I want to speak more generically about students of knowledge and people who've graduated out of Islamic seminaries and Darul Uloom and Islamic universities and so on, and how they think of themselves in terms of their future. And that obviously includes career, includes how they earn their livelihood, but also what else they do. Okay, so I'll try to cover it from that point of view. I don't think I will probably be as comprehensive as I suppose I could be, but I think that most angles will be covered, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so that's just a little caveat. Let me share the screen with you. So let's do this with the presentation, and we'll take it from there. If I'm not talking about a slide, if maybe Brother Bilal, I don't know if you can maybe just turn off the share when I'm not discussing the slide, so that you can see that I'm talking to you rather than just a little thumbnail in the corner. That might be useful as well. Okay, inshallah, if you can do that. And yeah, questions, comments, etc. Please feel free. I have one eye on the chat, so go ahead and do that. If you want to say something, then just raise your hand. There's a way to do that somewhere, and I'll unmute you. I think I didn't actually stop you guys from unmuting, so you can actually unmute yourself. Please remember to mute back, especially if you have any background noise. Okay, right. So share screen. because there's going to come a point where I'm actually going to discuss with you guys and kind of type them, sort of like as a flip chart type exercise. But let's carry on like this for now. Okay, so let's start, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So here we go. So the purpose of today is not really about giving you a list of career options and advising you about them, as I said. Obviously, we can do some of that inevitably. I'm sure people will be interested in that as well. So my objectives today are as follows, right? So to discuss what it means to be a student of knowledge or alim. I don't mean student of knowledge, doing ula thaniya or alif ba ta tha. In that sense, everybody's a student of knowledge. I'm talking about people like yourselves who make up the vast majority of people in the Tulab al-Ilm group, who are mostly either advanced students of knowledge in Darul Uloom or in Islamic Seminary, or you have already graduated, all right, and are looking ahead at what you're going to do with yourselves, right, for the rest of your lives. So really what I want to discuss, so one important discussion is, what does it mean to be you? What does it mean to be a student of knowledge or a alim? Irrespective of your career choice. And in that context, discuss some key qualities. And there are a few assumptions here. So first and foremost, when I say student of knowledge or alim, the relationship between those two terms is the relationship between hal and ma'al, right? So students of knowledge is our current state for all of us. Alim, or the idea of alim, is aspirational. They were all aspirationally ulama, but in our humility, I think we are always students of knowledge, right? And referring to Sharia graduates as ulama is something of a cultural convention. By no means is it true. By no means. I don't think any graduate of a Darul Uloom or Islamic Seminary, Islamic University can consider themselves a alim. But I think that even for the dedicated student of knowledge, should take at least 10 more years to consider themselves to be a alim of any kind, of any subject area. But anyway, so therefore, this is just it's become a kind of a formal title, right, for somebody who graduates out of an Islamic seminary, particularly the kind of Indian subcontinent based Dars Nizami based ones. All right, inshallah. So that's why I often use the term Sharia graduate, somebody who has graduated having studied in an Islamic seminary, Islamic university in Sharia, having studied Sharia. That's also an important qualification, because the people who kind of serve the function of, for want of a better term, of faith leadership, of providing theological leadership to the community, be it by way of answering people's masail, counseling them, giving them nasiha, preaching to them, teaching them, etc. Generally tend to be people who are Sharia graduates. And the reason why I say it like that is because obviously if you're from an Islamic university, then there are various kulliyat, there are different faculties, and it's possible to graduate from a faculty in an Islamic university that has nothing to do with Sharia. Like you've studied language, for example, right? So that's quite an important distinction to make, actually. And I wouldn't expect somebody who is a graduate of Kulliyatul Lugha to be out there, as an imam or kind of working in that capacity. Darul Uloom education is obviously much more generic. And essentially, the average Darul Uloom graduate is the equivalent of a Kulliyatul Sharia graduate, because you study Usuluddin, you study, and you study Sharia, basically fiqh. right? It's aqidah fiqh, and so it's your usul in terms of Quran, hadith, uh, and so on. And then there's a significant amount of Sharia studies in terms of usul al-fiqh and fiqh. And and then you've got, as part of the usul al-din, you've got your Quran, your hadith studies, your aqidah studies, and so on. I suppose it depends on what you mean by usul al-din as well. But anyway, so that's a really, really important qualification. People do an iftar course and they come out and they're mufti. Some of our teachers used to say, this is a form of shahadatul zur, right? For somebody to graduate out of Darul Uloom and to be regarded as alim is a kind of shahadatul zur, is a false testimony. So I suppose rather than put it in those harsh terms, that's a form of, I suppose that's a statement of humility, but to, I suppose, a more acceptable way and tolerable way to put it is to say that these are nothing more than social conventions, or community conventions. So it's urf, basically. It's min a'raf nas, and nothing to do with reality. Somebody who has done 2 years in a Darul Ifta is not a mufti, by no means. Many people who are considered mufti don't give a single fatwa for the rest of their lives. What kind of mufti is that? And probably ifta or mufti, more than anything else, is a vocational qualification, right? It's like if you give, you're a mufti if you give fatwa. If you don't, then you're not a mufti, right? So when we refer to somebody as a mufti, irrespective of whether they give fatwa or not, we're conforming to a social convention, a social urf. We're not really talking any kind of reality. So that is important for all of us to recognize this, okay? And and similarly, like terms like Maulana and so on they're all conventions. They're all part of the urf of people. Okay. So I want to talk about this and discuss in the context of that some key qualities, particularly generic qualities, right? That I think if we can get a handle on them and make them part of our own personal development plans, then it will help us in all career choices, right? Definitely. I mean, I'll throw it out there that I always say that somebody who has a good set of key qualities or key skills doesn't have to worry about career. They'll fit in anywhere. Most people who struggle in terms of job and career and livelihood or finding their feet in something or other are people who lack key skills. Okay. The other thing I'd like to discuss is what is our attitude towards money and career? I think that's a really, really important discussion. Perhaps one that a lot of you are clear about, but by way of dhikra and, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, I'd like to touch on it. What is the career of a talib al-ilm as a talib al-ilm? So if we recognize what a talib al-ilm is, what does a talib al-ilm's career look like? If all he did was be a talib al-ilm. Hope that makes sense, but we'll elaborate a bit more. These are points that I'm not really going to spell out to you for myself, but hopefully discuss with you, and we can chat, and I'll punch in what you say if I agree, on the condition that I agree. What careers align with the above? And we can then start talking about careers in the final point. Hopefully we can get to that in terms of what careers align with the above, what alternative forms of service can a talib ilm pursue post-graduation. So I've kind of worded things very carefully, and what other career options are there to earn a livelihood. Okay, so these are some of my discussion points, inshallah ta'ala. So let's move on to the first things that I want to talk about. So I want to begin by discussing what is a seminary. What is a seminary? What do we mean by seminary? Seminary is really a Christian term. Yeah. Sorry, I just saw somebody turn on their video, so I was wondering how I can. Okay, Shouldn't have happened. All right. So seminary is actually a Christian term, but it's okay to borrow it because seminary is an institution where Christian faith leaders or clergy are trained. I suppose it's the closest thing you can get, the closest thing to an English word for a Darul Uloom. All right. So Darul Uloom therefore can be loosely coined an Islamic seminary. I was part of a project last year? Yeah, 2019, 2020. So yeah, so beginning of last year, end of 2019, called the Universities and Muslim Seminaries project. And it was something that was commissioned by the Ministry for Communities, Housing and Local Government, or Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, I think it's the other word, MHCLG. It was commissioned to SOAS University, and I joined the program. I joined the project as a consultant and kind of co-led it with Professor Alison Scott Bowman. And mainly it was the project that I've spoken about on the Tulab group, but basically it's a project that aims to help universities understand Darul Ulooms and Darul Ulooms understand universities and explore, bring them together around the table and explore opportunities for collaboration, partnership, that kind of thing, but also, and in particular, explore possibilities of accreditation. So universities to accredit Darul Ulooms. My personal agenda was to explore the possibility of a university or universities, any university for that matter, if you understand how this works, any one university is enough, for a university to establish a precedent of accrediting the Alimiya program as a degree, basically. So that's, and the UMSEP project was supposed to make that feasible by scoping out some realities, inshallah. Anyway, one of the things that we deliberated over quite a lot, myself and my colleagues, was how we wanted to define an Islamic seminary. And I just want to share that with you. We came up with the definition. I want to share that with you, and maybe briefly, I'd like to see what you think. So an Islamic seminary is an institution that teaches an Alimiya or other scholarly training program that aligns with the religious authority and curriculum goals of a tradition of higher learning in the Islamic world. So the reason why that bit is there is because if you think about it, you set up an Alimiya program in the West. On where does this authority come from? Why should anybody take it seriously? So that's why really it borrows its authority from its alignment with the equivalent in the Muslim world. So that's why we say that it aligns with the religious authority and curriculum goals of a tradition of higher learning in the Islamic world. So a tradition of higher learning in the Islamic world, because there are multiples, right? So there could be, there's the system in the subcontinent, there's various systems in the Middle East and so on. There's the Azhari system, there's the various Moroccan systems and so on. Such traditions of higher learning may include the Dars Nizami curriculum, which is popular in the Indian subcontinent, or any model established in other parts of the Muslim majority world. As institutions of higher education, the training is usually offered to post-16 students whom it trains for scholarship in the Islamic sciences and or service of the community as faith leaders. Now, you might be thinking, oh, we went to Darul Uloom at 13 or 11. Yes, you did, but you probably didn't study the serious end of the Alimiya program until you were 16 or much older, right? And because this project was in the context of accreditation and building up and create a bit, fostering some sort of dialogue between universities and Islamic seminaries, we were only speaking at the higher education level. So therefore, I would say we're talking about Thalitha and above, if in terms of Darul Uloom speak, right? So Thalitha and above, or Rabia and above. So maybe Rabia or Charum, Khamisa, Mishkat, and maybe Dawra, give or take, basically, perhaps Dora could be bundled into that or not. It could be higher. It depends, really. It varies from institution to institution. So most people aren't at that level until they're post 16. And that's why it mentions post 16. These institutions may come under the names Darul Uloom, Madrasa, Islamic College, or University, Jamia, or other names, whatever, Ma'had, in Damascus, they have Mujamma' bin Nur, right? They have Ma'had al-Fath, right? For example, as two alternative terms. Okay. So what do you think of that? I think you can unmute yourselves. It's a bit long, but there's a number of things that this seeks to clarify. But one of the things that require reflection, that is going to be part of what I would like to do in this presentation, is this idea of aligning with the religious authority and curriculum goals of a tradition of higher learning in the Islamic world. So regardless of your thoughts on the definition itself, because that doesn't really matter, what do you guys think are the curriculum goals of these institutions? What are the curriculum goals? What are they trying to achieve? Because at the end of the day, you've all studied in these places. What do you think these places were set up to do? So I don't know, over to you guys. You can't just sit there quietly all evening. Let me know if you can't unmute. Come on, brothers and sisters.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, basically these curriculums are set up to have individuals that can deal with problems and help Muslims live their day-to-day lives, as well as the when in-depth things come up, then deal with those things as well.
Troubleshoot the problems of the Muslim community or Muslims. So yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say? Okay.
I would agree to that.
Go on.
I think that depends on where you studied and how they taught and the tarbiyah they gave you. So maybe the brother has got that background, but so another graduate may not have that background.
Yeah. Okay. So based on where you've studied and your background, what would you say the objective is? What would you say the curriculum objective is, or the curriculum goals are?
Well, the actual goal of Durban was that you learn the books, you learn the kitab that they've said to read and learn, and then you actually become proper leaders for the community and society. But the thing is, not all places facilitate for that. So because of that, that's not everyone follows the guidelines, I guess. And the syllabus has changed a lot. So yeah, I don't know. I just think that it's teaching books as well, but I think they focus on everything. But I don't think that's what all places provide.
Okay. So I think the point I'm taking from you is it's not the same for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess if we can find some sort of commonality, then that is difficult to argue against. Anyway, anyone else? Anyway, Jazakumullah for that. Thank you, sister and brother. I didn't check your name. Sorry. Go on. Anyone else?
Assalamu alaikum.
So
in regards to my madrasa here in Toronto, Al-Khalil Academy, I think the goals that Mufti Ibrahim Saab had was more of gaining a certain level of Arabic, right? That's one thing that every student should be able to pick up a book and be able to read it, right? Obviously that's there, and then with each book in its field, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, tafsir, it's to gain that munasabah with that field. and so that you're able to, if you have that introduction and you're able to be exposed to that field as well. And then you obviously, when you graduate, then you can further your readings and go further into whichever field that you like. So it was more of, that was the main objective of the curriculum itself. But then the secondary goals were obviously to become, well-grounded ulama and, be a certain level as a scholar in terms of guiding the ummah. That's there as well. But I think you're specifically asking about the curriculum. So, I mean, what I explained in the first part, that's what I felt in my madrasa, how it was.
Okay. So a lot of focus on the goals being academic, or rather to develop a certain academic competency. So ilm seems to be I think everybody seems to be referring to, so far the three people that have said, the common thread has been not just raising a level of knowledge, right? Raising people's level of knowledge, if you like. So it's a kind of Islamic knowledge literacy, if you want to call it that. One of the brothers that is saying in the chat, to continue and pass down the knowledge and traditions from the Prophet ﷺ, as alims are the custodians of prophetic knowledge, to give the ability and tools for the individual to be able to study for themselves. Yeah. So this I would say is quite a traditional answer. But obviously somebody can turn around and say, yeah, but they don't produce ulama, so therefore. But yeah, I get you. And obviously that's it'd be interesting to see if anybody disagrees with that. Actually, it's in the chat, this latest contribution. Anyone else? Last one, inshallah.
Assalamu
alaikum.
I think most everyone has the right to their own opinions, but I think most Darul Ulooms and madrasa these days, the issue we faced previously is a lot of our scholars would come from like the Indian subcontinent, like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, etc., etc. And the issue we have now is the fact that I think that the main wisdom behind Darul Ulooms and madrasa in the UK's was there was the language barrier where the scholars from these countries would come. A lot of the elder generation would understand them. Problem is the younger generation didn't understand it because there was a different vibe, it was different understanding, different upbringing. So I think, other than the academia side to it in terms of books and that, I think it was to develop good Muslims in terms of leadership where they could fill that gap in. So in terms of if any of the youth, that students could understand how people are being brought up in terms of secondary school mixing or college and university, how basically everyday data life, where students could understand how people live in this country, but at the same time could have that access where the people from the UK would see that actually these scholars or these students of knowledge can speak English. We can speak to them and they understand where we are coming from. Yeah. So it's not they're not carrying that that culture and a lot of cultural stuff that gets mixed in the religion. And like many of our parents will think that's a religion, but I think it's like a fine line where you can actually differentiate that. From the madrasa I graduated from, like, you are right, they do teach us Islamic stuff, but I think the sad thing is they don't really set us up for the real world. I'll give you an example. Obviously, we know about tawakkul, etc., etc. But when you get into the real world, they don't actually tell us how to like deal with these stuff, like actual marriage life or actual business life, or actually how to deal with like businesses on a professional level. I think that's the only thing we lack. So I was kind of glad the point where you mentioned the fact that you're kind of trying to do something where Darul Ulooms and universities are trying to like bridge the gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the main thing is madrasa is we're trying to help the generation of the Muslims in the UK who have kind of, to be honest, have lost their way. And they don't feel comfortable enough. Because obviously in the Seerah, the companions would approach the Prophet and ask, in our sense, would be silly questions or stupid questions. Obviously, we deem that, but to them, the Prophet was welcome to all questions, and no matter what question it was or no matter what situation it was, he used wisdom. So in terms of, I think that's where this, I know we're not scholars, far from that, but the English youth here, the English Muslims here won't approach the imams in the masjid and ask them questions, because obviously with the culture, we were kind of like shunned from the masjid.
Yeah.
I think because we speak English, we know how it is, with example, the school boyfriend, girlfriends, we know how things are in terms of how easy things are, because we understand it. This is normal for us. Whereas a lot of our parents and grandparents, it was like, no, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much.
So, so what I meant by curriculum goals, of course, are every institution teaches a curriculum, right? Through its curriculum, what does it aim to achieve in the students, right? That's really the key question. And you've all mentioned different things. There was some focus on raising people's level of knowledge. I think that the last contribution from the brother was particularly about the lack of I call it contextualization. Whatever the curriculum goals are, but basically they didn't prepare us for our context, and language was discussed. Just anecdotally, I just want to share an Arab scholar was once offered a role in the UK, and he was asked, well, you don't speak English, so how are you going to serve? And his answer is really, really interesting, because he simply said, it takes 6 months to learn the language. So if I don't speak the language, so I'll learn it. It takes 6 months to learn it. And I remember myself and my colleagues at Ibrahim College, we used to always use this as an example of what the correct attitude should be. This is why I ultimately bring it back to curriculum objectives and what is it that you are, irrespective of your weaknesses. If you can acknowledge who you are properly and what your role and function is, and what's the objective and what are the aims and objectives of the institutions that you graduated from, then you have some appreciation for what you need to do. Language, skills, etc., are all weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. They're all things that we can overcome, provided that we know what our objectives are. But you have to be committed to that. And for whatever reason, I often don't understand how ulama who come over from abroad after 10, 15, 20 years can't bring themselves to speak the language. It doesn't make any sense to me. And how if we move into any career, all of us, if we move into any career, we have no trouble overcoming our skills shortages. But somehow Darul Uloom graduates, they tend to wallow in their skill shortages for the rest of their lives. And I always wondered, like, what's going on here? Like, why is it that the Darul Uloom graduates seem to struggle to overcome their skills shortages? Anyway, that's another conversation, but it's something to think about. Whatever skill shortages we have, they can be overcome if we have the right attitude. But let's put it this way. If we say that the objective of the curriculum objectives of Darul Uloom are to raise us in knowledge, increase us in knowledge, then with knowledge comes a duty. And I think that takes us back to what the brother said in the chat, which is to pass down knowledge and traditions from the Prophet ﷺ, to continue and pass down the knowledge and traditions from the Prophet ﷺ. Alims are custodians of prophetic knowledge, and therefore essentially that the duty is there, it's implied, and that duty is implied regardless of title, right? Regardless of title, meaning that it doesn't matter whether you think of yourself as a alim or not, but if you have knowledge, knowledge is always relative. Every person of knowledge has somebody who's more knowledgeable, but with any level of knowledge comes the duty of propagation. All right, فَلْيُبَلِّغِ الشَّاهِدُ الْغَائِبِ, etc. So, the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith seriously rebuked people who despite knowing do not teach, and people who despite not knowing do not learn. Right? It's a moderately long hadith, but a really, really important one that actually frames this issue. It's probably a more important hadith than like the ones that we're used to, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ. For a talib al-ilm, that hadith is central. We usually tend to use a hadith like the virtues of a talib al-ilm and خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلم, etc. But there is a serious conversation about duty of transmission, duty of passing knowledge on, that is borne out in some very, very clear hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. I'll share the wording with you, inshallah, if we get around to it. So anyway, enough of what I wanted to talk, the idea of a seminary. But all I wanted to say is, you've all studied at institutions, and it's a good idea to consider what was the point of it? Like, why was I there? What was the institution trying to produce in me? That's kind of really, really important, right? When I eventually ended up setting up an institution in the form of Ibrahim College, that's one of the things that I made sure that we were very, very clear about. And we always made it clear to the students that the institution has been set up as part of the effort of preservation of deen, preservation of iman, and therefore people who come here need to come with that objective in mind, right? We expect you to be aligned to that objective, right? You know, if you're not, then there is a disconnect. So it's important to consider what the role of the institution is. Okay, moving on. Okay, so I'd like to now say, you know, generic qualities that will get you ahead. I want to talk a little bit about this. What are generic qualities that we can all work on, right? Regardless of what you end up doing, but these will get you ahead. Okay, so a Sharia graduate is like a university graduate. Okay, so university graduates do not necessarily graduate in a vocational field. A vocational field is a field that is directly tied to a particular job. Like if you study medicine, or if you do an LLB and go and do the bar, then you're trying to become a doctor, or you're trying to become a doctor of some kind, a very specific professional area, or you're trying to become a lawyer, right? If you go and do an accountancy degree, or you go and do the accountancy qualification, you're clearly trying to become an accountant. These are very vocational studies, right? However, many study a subject at an undergraduate level without necessarily having a specific career in mind. Their courses are fairly generic. Like, you think of an English graduate, right? Lots and lots of people study English. Or a politics graduate. Every politics graduate isn't trying to be a politician. They're just studying politics, right? So where does that take them? A philosophy graduate. Generally, all of the humanities, right? You know, there's thousands and thousands of students studying humanities, studying arts and so on. What career are they exactly getting ready for? So there isn't always a specific career in mind, unless they're studying a subject in order to teach it, i.e. their particular career trajectory, or the career they have in mind is to then train as a teacher and become a teacher. But that's not everybody. So the point I'm trying to make is that many do not have a clear career path mapped out for them, but they know that a degree will give them the best chance to get a good job and career. Employers seek them out because they expect them to have a set of generic skills that make them more employable, meaning this guy's a graduate, there's an assumption that there are certain skills this guy's going to have, or this woman is going to have, therefore it's a safe bet. They're a safe bet, more so than this other person who might even have a year's worth of experience. Right? My question to you is, what do you think those generic skills are? Right? If you're not a graduate. If you are, then you can share what they are. And another question that I've put in here is, if you're just a Sharia graduate from a Darul Uloom and so on, would you consider your studies to be geared towards a specific vocation or not? Like, is our studies in Darul Uloom like studying medicine or law, and therefore kind of pushing us towards a particular vocation, or is it more generic? Right? And that ties back to the idea of curriculum objectives and so on. That's something to think about. Okay? Inshallah ta'ala. Anyway, so let's move on, because I'm going to run out of time. So let's move on to what some of these generic qualities are. So I'm not trying to talk to you about what the generic qualities of a university graduate. What I'm trying to answer here is, if we were to say that there are a set of generic qualities that a Darul Uloom graduate should have, regardless of whether they have them or not. What are those generic qualities, right? What are they? And these are things for you for everybody to kind of think about and actually do a development plan based on. It's like, okay, where am I with regards to these skills? Because if you're nowhere, then you have some work to do, right? And if you're somewhere on the spectrum, then there's a clear progression path. All right, inshallah. So firstly, what are the generic qualities and skills a Sharia graduate should have? So firstly, I think it goes without saying, discipline and management of time and deadlines. Now, we in boarding school, we have, most of us are residential students, some are not, but we have years, sometimes up to a decade of very, very disciplined and managed schedules. We wake up a particular time, we eat a particular time, we sleep a particular time, we study at fixed times, we do everything at fixed times, salah is in jama'ah, everything is very regimented. But I often find that despite that background, if this is a skill, a transferable skill, so all key skills are supposed to be transferable, right? Or all career-based skills are supposed to be transferable. I mean, you can take them with you wherever you go. If you go from one job to another, regardless of what the job is, regardless, the job may be a million miles away from your last job, those skills you take with you, right? And you're able to apply them to the new job. They're transferable skills, right? For example, the ability to change the spark plug in a car isn't a transferable skill, right? But the ability to problem solve is a transferable skill, because you end up with having to apply problem solving everywhere, right? So if you're naturally a person who likes to problem solve and fix things, that's your natural tendency. You have a background, you're able to demonstrate with examples how you do that, then that's a transferable skill that every single employer, wherever you're employed, will value that. Obviously, you have to prove it. You have to show that you have that skill set. Anyway, so despite the fact that we understand discipline and management of time, I often find that Sharia graduates don't seem to have it as a transferable skill, right? Because it isn't as well demonstrated in their personal lives and sometimes in their professional lives as well. And one of my theories about why that might be, and I often reflect, kind of about myself as well, but one of the reasons why that might be is because in Darul Uloom, their regimented and disciplined lifestyle is regimented and disciplined for them. Does that make sense? In fact, it's so regimented that there's almost no room for maneuver. There's no option. There's no choice left. So there is no exercising of discretion in order to develop discipline and time management as a treasured value, as something that you yourself treasure. It happens in some students, but that's the difference. There's a difference between creating an environment where students value that as a transferable skill and creating an environment where students are kind of made to stick to a discipline such that after 10 years of it, they just want to chill, right? There's a big difference between the two things. Yeah. So one of the sisters is saying that that our upper would say, if you couldn't come on time to madrasa in these years of study, you can never do it after. Yeah. So psychologically, I can reverse that. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Psychologically, it actually works in reverse. That it's inevitable that you will have to stick to the regime when you're in Darul Uloom because you're in a residential institution. But the very reason why it is so regimented and you tend to conform puts you at risk of not being able to do it outside because it was all done for you. Do you get what the bit of reversal I'm kind of trying to do here? So my point is, if anybody is struggling with time management and things like that as a skill, what you have to overcome now is you have to value it for yourself. Because chances are that if you still don't have it, despite Darul Uloom, then it's because the skill, it wasn't developed in you as a transferable skill that you opted into, that you chose for yourself, but you've always seen it as something that you had to do, and now you have the freedom to not do it. And before you know it, within 6 months, you've developed bad habits that you can't get rid of, because your bad habits were by your choice, whereas your good habits of 10 years were not by your choice. So think about that, because it's because I've noticed it's an issue for a lot of people who come out of Darul Uloom. Particularly, they tend to come out and they just feel like, I've had 10 years away from home and 10 years of regimented life, and I just want to take a break. All right. And that break becomes disastrous for them. Okay. But let me know what your thoughts are, inshallah. That's just an observation. Number 2, Islamic literacy. So for a Darul Uloom graduate, Islamic literacy is a must, right? Knowledge of Islam. Islamic literacy, knowledge of Islam. But the point I want to make here is that Islamic literacy is not a done deal, right? It's not like I have studied and my literacy is done and that's it. I don't need any more. So it's an ongoing journey, and therefore you have to be able to demonstrate. Like, if you have studied 7-8 years, a series, a range of subjects, language, aspects of philosophy, theology, you've studied law, etc., etc. You're a highly educated person. You're a highly educated person, right? The question now is, are you literate in those subjects? Right? What level have you studied those subjects at? Right? Secondary, A-level, degree. What does it mean to be literate in those subjects? Well, whatever you think it means, it would be incorrect to think that it's ended for you, right? Meaning that I'm now literate, right? You have to basically ask yourself, well, what else is needed? What are my gaps? Where can I improve? Where can I broaden my horizons, broaden my literacy, and so on? So therefore, so I don't mean literacy in terms of language here, that's coming up. So therefore, my advice on this front is, as a generic skill, you have to always engage in reading and mutala and learn comparatively. So number 1, first is engaging reading and mutala. My observation, right, and obviously I know a lot of Darul Uloom graduates, my observation is that reading and mutala is dead in Darul Uloom graduates. Please tell me why, and tell me if I'm wrong. But for whatever reason, Darul Uloom graduates tend to stop reading after they graduate. Right? Number 1. Number 2, learn comparatively. Most of us have been educated not just in Islam, but a particular strand of Islamic thought. A particular strand of Islamic thought. Deobandi, Sufi, Brelwi, Salafi, Ikhwani, etc., etc., etc. We've been, and even if you were to narrow it down to subject, then even in our fiqh, we have studied a particular fiqh. Now, if you want to develop your literacy further, it's absolutely critical that you further your learning comparatively. That doesn't mean, so the Darul Uloom's objective may have been to make you competent in a dominant madhab. And now you go and you serve people of that madhab by being able to answer their questions and guide them and so on and so forth. So that now you're essentially fulfilling a vocation, a role in the community. That's what you've been prepared for. But in terms of your literacy, your learning, your education, you need to have a broad comparative outlook. A person asks you a question about salat, you don't have to unload the four madahib on them. Just tell them what they're meant to do. But your knowledge of fiqh needs to be comparative and broad, so that where necessary you can rely upon that, and also so that your knowledge continues to grow and broaden. So it's important to learn comparatively, in when it comes to the Islamic sciences. The second point is, don't assume everything you know is authentic and relevant in every context. And I say this particularly to Darul Uloom graduates, right? Don't assume that everything you know is authentic and relevant in every context. And this boils down to what one of the brothers said about a lot of what we don't know how to relate it to youth, etc., etc. So sometimes what happens is people come out of Darul Uloom and they 100% believe in what they've studied. And they come and they literally just dump that on the community, right? And they try to basically fit, a square peg into a round hole, right? It doesn't work, because you're the square peg and the community is the round hole, and it's a non-fit, right? Because you've made an assumption, and that assumption is that I've studied Quran, I've studied Sunnah, I've studied the Deen. Everybody has to conform to what I know, right? So, and therefore what I've studied is relevant everywhere. Well, no. The bottom line is that you haven't considered the nuances of the Sharia, and you've probably been taught in a very ideological way, right? You've probably been taught based on the dictates of a particular movement, as opposed to taught Sharia in its full breadth, right? And obviously, don't assume everything that you know is authentic. So you're told this is authentic, this is haqq, this is batil, etc., etc., etc. You can't assume all of it to be true. Yes, inshallah, the majority of it is, but again, you have to learn comparatively, and you have to always verify everything, including what you learn from your teachers. My personal experience in one particular area has been a big learning curve, right? And that is in the area of hadith. I came to realize after graduation that the vast majority of ahadith that I heard in bayans were inauthentic, right? Some of them not even permissible for me to cite. Like I'm using it in a bayan because I've heard it in a bayan from a teacher, and unbeknown to me, the hadith is fabricated. It's haram for me to use it, right? Because when it comes to corroborating and checking isnad of a hadith, right, the Darul Uloom tradition is weak, right? We just amass them, meaning we just read the texts, right, and we study them, and we're strong on diraya. The Muslim world acknowledges the Darul Uloom system is very strong on dirayat al-hadith, meaning we study a hadith and we look at commentary and what it means and what the ulama say about it, etc., etc. But with this we focus on the matan of the hadith, and we don't focus a lot on the sanad or the isnad of the hadith, right? That's a problem, because it means that you fall foul of making incorrect istinbat based on incorrect hadith, not being able to correct people when they're coming up with with stuff that's actually fabricated, right? So you can't make the correction because you don't know, and you just assume it's correct because it's there in a hadith book. It's in Mishkat, for example. Doesn't mean it's authentic. So that's just an example, right? But it's possible that this is true in other areas as well. Okay. And then as a bare minimum, when it comes to protecting your literacy, at least go over your basics again and again. So your Quran, right? At least tarjamatan, at least both the Arabic and the meaning, right? If that's if the meanings are not mustahdar already. Those people who studied tarjama Quran and tafsir really well, the meaning is already mustahdar. So then it's a question of keeping your mutala up in terms of your tafsir. So perhaps going for a manageable size tafsir book and revising it once every year. And then the same goes for a basic hadith text, keeping it fresh in your mind all the time. Whether Mishkat is quite big, but maybe Riyadh al-Salihin for the sake of preaching purposes and so on. A basic fiqh primer, revising it again and again. A seerah book or a different seerah book every year to keep your seerah fresh year on year. something, either regular Arabic reading. So one concern has been that a lot of Darul Uloom graduates don't read in Arabic anymore, which is sad because your whole distinction is your Arabic literacy. Your whole distinction is your Arabic literacy. But people come out of the doors of a Darul Uloom and read Urdu in English for the rest of their lives. Then why did you go to a Darul Uloom? That doesn't make any sense, right? You're depriving yourself of the Ummahatul Kutub, of the main books. You're depriving yourself of the main fountain of knowledge, which exists in the Arabic language. Everything you'll get in English and in Urdu is secondhand. Everything. There's even the translations are secondhand, because a translation is a form of interpretation. Translation is ta'wil, because you can't say the translation of the Quran is the Quran. You can't say the translation of Bukhari is Bukhari, because it's not. Because all translations have an element of tahrif, have an element of corruption in them. Does that make sense? So really important. Now, if you're struggling with your Arabic, there you go. You have a development objective, right? So that's literacy. Number three is a kind of is a repetition of this point about Arabic, but in a more general sense. So language and economic literacy. I always say to Darul Uloom graduates that somebody's
all you people and showed decency in picking their video.
Apologies, one of you was unmuted and we're talking to somebody else. All right, so what was I saying? Yes, so language and economic literacy. So language literacy, what I mean by that is most Darul Uloom graduates are multilingual. It's an amazing skill set, but their multilingualism is also weak on multiple fronts. They speak multiple languages, but they are familiar with multiple languages, but they are poorly familiar with all of them, right? Naturally, there are 2 to 3 languages that we all have some sort of familiarity with, right? So the bare minimum is our mother tongue and Arabic, right? And it could be because we studied in the Darul Uloom where they teach in Urdu and my mother tongue is Urdu and I don't know English. Very unlikely, which means that the vast majority have 3 languages. English, the mother tongue, and Arabic. And some have 4 because their mother tongue, like me, because their mother tongue is not Urdu, right? So, for example, I ended up because of Darul Uloom, I ended up with Bengali, obviously, Bengali English, so that's by default. Then we have then Urdu because of Darul Uloom, and then Arabic because of Darul Uloom, 4 languages, right? And that's the case with many people. So we're multilingual. So this idea of language literacy, though, it presents a challenge in that we tend to be quite weak in all of them, all right? And we have to work on that. So part of my effort after Darul Uloom was actually to back off from Urdu, which I was highly literate in because it's the medium language in Darul Uloom, and work on my Bangla, develop my Arabic more, and develop my English more. 3 languages I felt I needed to. And this is my advice to all Darul Uloom graduates. Connect with your mother tongue. Seriously, take a course, connect with your mother tongue so that you can converse with your community, your ethnic community. You need to become proficient in English, and you need to remain proficient in Arabic, or become proficient in Arabic if your Arabic is weak. Basics, right? It's a question of going over, again, the curriculum objectives that were set out in the Darul Uloom. Maybe you didn't achieve them very well. It's a good idea to basically go over them, and it will make you better. It will actually make you better in your career, etc. Because what is language? Like you put on a CV that you're multilingual and you're truly multilingual, all of a sudden your numbers go up. All right. So, and there are other aspects to this. There's entrepreneurship benefits and so on and so forth. Number 4, social and community literacy. Here, get beyond sectarian enclaves. If you're a Deobandi, try to just open your eyes a bit wider. If you're a Brelvi, open your eyes a bit wider. If you're a Salafi, open your eyes a bit wider. Get beyond sectarian enclaves. Definitely don't get into the business of refutations and attacking everybody else just because they're not you. So just because they're not Deobandi, I'm going to suspect everything they say. Just because they're not Brelwi, I'm going to suspect everything they say. Just because they're not Salafi, I'm going to suspect everything they say. That's evidence of a poor education, right? That's evidence of a poor education. You know, that's fact. Okay, so and that's one of the flaws of Islamic seminary education. It's one of the flaws, believe it or not, right? Because in the sense that they tend to that there's an element of indoctrination in them, and I don't mean that as a criticism, as purely as criticism, because our asatidha and elders felt this was necessary because they thought that their manhaj is the truth, right? But actually, almost every alim that develops in knowledge recognizes that actually there's more to the story, which makes me think, well, why couldn't you educate your students in that way then from the outset? And one of the reasons is psychological and political. Psychological in that everybody wants the superiority of what they have. It's a loyalty to who you are, to yourself, to your own identity. And political is a little bit more controversial in the sense that you want to be above your competitors, your rival ideologies, right? And that's, I would say, that's part. It's not malicious, and that's why I don't blame anybody. It's just part of being human. But if you may continue your education, you overcome that, right? And you end up much more open-minded, and you end up being able to work with more people. That actually makes you more employable. All right. So get beyond sectarian enclaves, understand how society works. So if you don't, then you need to understand how this country operates. Sometimes Darul Uloom graduates don't know that, right? And don't have that. How society works, how your local community works, what the infrastructure is and so on. And try to understand people, right? The different layers in people, the ethnic layer, the religious layer, the cultural layer. These things are quite important. Be observant. Read about it if you can. If not, at least be observant. Talk to people, meet people, be social. Number 5, spiritual and physical health. We have to be constantly committed to self-evaluation and self-development. There is a danger of Darul Uloom graduates coming out of a closed, sheltered environment and literally suffering from what I call the jack-in-the-box effect, which is suddenly they enjoy this freedom and boom, right? All these days, there was restrictions, there was no money. Now you earn a little bit of money, and all of a sudden you can, you have a smartphone, a computer, Netflix is only £6 a month or whatever, Amazon Prime is only a few pounds a month, and boom, right? All of a sudden. So it's important to keep a hold on ourselves spiritually and so forth, and continue to self-evaluate and continue to self-develop and maintain our spiritual routines that we had in Darul Uloom, and so on, because هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون goes both ways, by the way. So it go on the one hand, people who know are not the same as people who do not know in terms of virtue, but also they're not the same in terms of punishment as well, right? وَالْقُرْآنُ حُجَّةٌ لَكَ أَوْ عَلَيْكَ, as we know. And then finally, when it comes to the service of the community, we need a high level of care, concern, empathy, and activism. And related to that is number 7, which is listen and advise. Everything is in an istifta. So most of us feel we have a duty to help people and advise, etc., etc. And people ask us questions naturally. Every Darul Uloom graduate has a congregation. Every Darul Uloom graduate has a congregation. But we have a tendency, because we've studied a lot of fiqh, we have a tendency to always feel the need to answer, and we listen less. So my advice to everybody is reset that, learn to listen. Listen first, advise afterwards, right? I'd say listen 3 times. And then maybe, if you think you've properly understood a person's context, then advise. And sometimes what you have to remember is, if you're really good at your fiqh, you're going to want to give a mas'ala-based answer. You're going to want to give a fiqh answer. That's not necessarily what people want from you. It's not. Sometimes people ask you a question and it's just a cry for help. Sometimes your fiqh answer is going to devastate them, right? because you haven't understood their haja, their darura, their necessity. You haven't understood the state of mental health. So it's really, really important to try to recognize these things by listening carefully. All right. And it's always good to caveat as well. Always good to caveat. Yeah. So as in always say, like if you're answering a question at a distance, say go to somebody close to you, or like I'm answering based on what you've told me. Yeah, maybe I don't know the full story, or etc. Sometimes people are asking you a question to use your words against somebody else. So it's important to caveat it and say, well, my advice is based on what you have told me. Do you understand? So if what you are saying, meaning that this is what I'm answering you is not the truth. It is simply an answer to a scenario that you have presented to me. Does that make sense? So sometimes these caveats are really, really important. Basically, always avoid absolutism. There's no absolutism. There is only absolutism in qat'iyyat, right? In la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, in arkan al-iman, in the arkan al-islam, in the absolute qat'iyyat of the deen, right? What we call ma'lumun min ad-din bid-darura. These things are clearly a matter of right, wrong, haqq, batil. Everything else that falls within the domain of the ijtihad of the mujtahideen are not qat'iyyat. And when they're not qat'iyyat, you have to always have some nuance and the room for caveats, room for exceptions. There are always istithna'at. And that's why you need that literacy. That's why you need that broader comparative education. Okay. Finally, mentorship. Seek it, give it. Right? Mentorship is something that we need as students of knowledge. It's also something that the community desperately needs. Seek it, give it. The reason why I say mentorship is because mentorship involves sustained contact with people. A lot of us, we maintain contact at a distance, right? Find people that you can help in a sustained way. Find somebody that can help you from a tarbiyah point of view in a sustained way. Find good advisors, good murabbis, good advisors, people who know what they're talking about, people who know you and understand you and can always assist you and advise you. Always have people older than you, wiser than you, that you can go to. Always. All right. You will avoid so many mistakes. All right. And finally, don't make your whole life about career and money and earning, which is the next point, actually. Always ask yourself, and this is something that my father always challenges me about. Always ask yourself this question. I've studied the deen. I'm a talib al-ilm. I'm supposed to do things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What am I doing for free? What is my voluntary contribution? Always ask yourself that question. What am I doing for free? What is my voluntary contribution? These, for me, are some, not all, but some of our generic skills as students of knowledge. Right? That if you don't have that, you shouldn't regard yourself as a student of knowledge. Alim is a distant dream. And if you don't fine-tune these things, you're going to struggle in any career. Even if you do get into one, you'll struggle. Like, if you're struggling on discipline and management of time and deadlines, on literacy, on your Islamic literacy, you'll struggle in Islamic careers. When it comes to generally language and economic literacy, I forgot about economic literacy. So numbers, maths, financial literacy, how to manage money, stuff like that, extremely important, right? Understanding the economy and how the economy operates so that you can make smart economic choices. Read about these things, learn about them, find somebody that can advise you on these things if you don't know, because we didn't learn these things in madrasa. And if you're socially what's the word I'm looking for? Some people are basically socially not illiterate, but kind of dysfunctional because they just don't engage. They're very, very introverted. That's a problem. You're going to struggle in the workplace. You need to be able to understand people. You need to be able to bounce off people. You need to have an element of fluidity about your personality and so on. All right. And obviously spirituality and things like that are absolutely critical. I mentioned physical health, right? Because like why? Okay, it's a cliche, but it's kind of, there's an element of truth in it, man. Like, why are Malvis overweight? Like, why is that a thing? Seriously. I mean, to the extent that Malvis themselves are now making jokes about it, right? Somebody forwarded a video of some Malvis who I don't know, basically making a joke about it. It's not funny, right? It's not funny, and it's you know, at some level, it's also mukhalafat sunnah. We're like overboard about pagri pen or shalwar ko upar rakho and all of this stuff, right? In Urdu, Darul Uloom people will get my point, right? But somehow there's no sunnah when it comes to watching our weight, when it comes to 1/3 of the stomach is supposed to be empty, 1/3 water, 1/3 food. When it comes to, no, these things are not sunnah. Like all of the other sunnah al-zawaid, when it comes to dress, etc., are important. But when it comes to lifestyle, how we live our lives, how we eat, our diet, none of that's important. None, those things are not sunnah al-zawaid. They're not. They're excluded. Why? Because we've decided that we're not going to pursue some of our shahwat, but other shahwat we are going to pursue. Well, that's what kind of, you know, that's not very balanced, is it? So I think looking after our physical health is similar. We need to get over. That's one of the reasons why young people don't relate to us either, by the way, because we're not very attractive. Not in terms of looks, but in terms of the way we are, the way we live our lives. You understand? You need energy to engage with people. Okay, inshallah. Anyway, I don't know what people are saying, by the way. I haven't looked for a while because I'm getting concerned about time. I want to jump a little bit, okay, and move on to some things that are to do with career, because otherwise you guys are going to stone me and say, what was the point of attending this? You never said anything about career. So I'm just going to quickly look at your questions and then jump to the stuff that's related to career. Okay, inshallah. Okay. One of the things about I never sent my son to a boarding school, and my parents always tell me off about it, right? And one of the reasons why I didn't send him is because I found, obviously I've run a day institution for a long time, and what I found is people who study in day institutions are more actually functional, because they learned what it's like to commute every day, to go to a place of daily activity, to come home from a place of daily activity, etc., etc. Time management has lots of added complex dimensions to it because of the fact that they have to factor in commute and so on, which is very different from going downstairs to your classroom. Even university students, you know, sometimes campuses are quite far away from your dorm. You know, it can be as much as a 10-15 minute walk and so on. So sometimes it's a drive, sometimes it's a bus ride, etc. But Darul Ulooms tend to be everything in one building, right? Or everything in a small kind of campus. So that's I've always found that to be the case, and I thought that and part of it is selfish, because I didn't like being away from my family for so long, and I didn't want my children to go through that. But I definitely benefited from it. Another aspect of it is I wanted to keep an eye on his education myself. So anyway, that was just I saw a comment on that, that's why I mentioned it. So are there any books you'd recommend for quick references of other madahib if you are randomly approached by someone with a question related to other madahib? So there's two things you should do, I think. Number one is obviously book-wise, I tend to just go to Wahba Zuhayli's Al-Fiqh Al-Islami wa Adillatuh, simply because it's so easy to find stuff in there, right? You've seen the Shamila hopefully you've seen the Shamila presentation. It's in Shamila as well, so you can find it there. Another book of comparative fiqh, not always accurate in my opinion, is is al-fiqh al-islami, al-fiqh al-madahib al-arba'a. Okay, so those are in terms of some basic references of books. Another way to do this is to study a basic primer of another madhab with a scholar of that madhab. I personally haven't done that, I have to say honestly, right? But I have access to people of other madahib, and I often just ask them, because sometimes what's written in books is very different to what the people of the madhab know. So, you know, like when somebody from another madhab quotes you a Hanafi mas'ala and you know they've got it completely wrong. Well, Hanafis do the same thing with others, right? And that's why it's a good idea to always have some relationship with people of other madhab who are educated in those madhabs, so that you can always ask them, all right? And if you can't study with them, then at least get them to recommend you an authoritative matan, like the equivalent of Nur al-Idah, or the equivalent, the Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali equivalent of Mukhtasar al-Quduri, Nur al-Idah, al-Ikhtiyar, etc. And you basically go through that. Okay. Similar, yeah, military regiment. Yeah, I always use that analogy. I say that madrasa life is a bit like military life. All right. So, but that's not, military life doesn't produce academics. It doesn't produce people of knowledge and thought. And there's a disconnect there. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to go into kind of thank you, brother Naqash. Al-Musul Fiqh al-Kuwaitiyya is also a good reference. I agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, so thanks for adding that. All right, what else? Where are we? Okay, so I'm going to skip what is our attitude towards money and career. Maybe I've touched on it a little bit. It is actually something I like to go on about. So I'm going to, at the risk of doing that, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to move on and just quickly move on to what is the career of a talib al-ilm as a talib al-ilm. Now here, I'm just going to reiterate one point. The career of a talib al-ilm as a talib al-ilm, the answer to that question is in the word, talabul ilm. So your most fundamental career as a talabul ilm is talabul ilm. If you want to be who you are already, then you've got to keep seeking knowledge, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, by definition, the acquisition of knowledge requires the propagation of knowledge, the passing on of knowledge. So therefore, a basic career of a talib al-ilm is to teach. For the most part, most of us do that, at least at the level of maktab, or, you know, like teaching children, which should not be undermined, right? That is an amazing khidmah, and therefore do it well. And I'm going to come to that. All right. And finally, part of ta'aleem is irshad, is wa'd, is tarbiyah, is tazkiyah, all of those things. And therefore, really, ta'aleem needs to be, you have to think of ta'aleem prophetically, right? So when you seek knowledge, what are you seeking? You're seeking ta'aleem, tarbiyah, tazkiyah, all of those things, right? When you're imparting, you're also giving all of that. And it's important to recognize that. And this obviously ties in with one of the brothers said in the chat, which is that we're supposed to be warathatul anbiya. So if you're warithul anbiya, then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innama bu'ithtu mu'alliman." And the idea of ta'aleem as the Prophet as a mu'allim is also the idea of يعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم. All of that is in there. إنما بعثت لأتمم مكارم الأخلاق. All of that is factored in to the idea of الرسول المعلم, which of course is the title of a book by Shaykh al-Fattah Khudda, I believe. All right. Now, so that's who you are, right? As far as I'm concerned, if you've been to Darul Uloom, that's who you are. If you don't recognize that, then there is a disconnect between what you've done in your Darul Uloom days and who you think you are now. That's okay. That's not something to negatively judge, but it's important to recognize that. All right. Now the question is, what careers align with the above? I think that becomes easy to answer, right? So I've written a few in comments. I was actually going to take the time to type these up, and we probably need the part 2 to be able to do that. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to come out of full screen now. and basically activate mind. Oh, I didn't write these ones. What careers align with the above? So I would say the careers that, sorry, let me get rid of my notes again. So the careers that align with this, I mean, you can punch a few, but the most obvious one is maktab, madrasa, right? Sorry. Madrasa, teaching children. Almost all the average Darul Uloom graduate, particularly those who don't have many other options, are working class, are not from wealthy backgrounds, they tend to make ends meet in the beginning by doing maktab madrasa type work or teaching children, even as I consider that all to be a sector, that all of that the provision of supplementary Islamic education to children. Everybody does it. What I want to say about this, actually, let's move on, right? Then there's FT Islamic education, right? Then there's Darul Uloom teaching. A small number of people end up getting snapped up by the Darul Ulooms because they're academically gifted, etc., etc. And I suppose, Darul Uloom teaching comes under full-time Islamic education, but let's just say I mean Islamic education as in Islamic schooling. Darul Uloom education is obviously seminary education. Then you've got masjid, so the masjid-based careers, whether that's you're an imam, assistant imam, mu'adhin, or in some other capacity, most likely it's going to be one of those three, and most likely it will involve the first one as well, maktab madrasa teaching. And very popular nowadays is chaplaincy, right? Which is kind of an imamate role, but for the government, providing spiritual care, counseling, and religious guidance for people within a certain government service sector, NHS, a small number of people in universities, in university chaplaincy roles. But there's even an armed forces chaplain, but very popularly and sadly, prison chaplaincy, right? And I guess NHS and prison chaplaincy are probably the two big sectors. All right, inshallah. I expect this to grow, and it is good, and it offers, options for development, etc., etc. And it actually develops people's imamate credentials. So that's how do you get into it? Just you need to be job hunting and looking out for it. Is that what you should seek? That's up to you. All right, it's up to you what you seek. For a lot of people, finding a job it's a question of necessity. But there are some people who will prioritize. The reason I've done a separate slide for this, what careers align with the above, meaning the role of a talib ilm as a talib ilm, is because a lot of people, when I graduated, I faced a choice. I want to serve the deen. What do I do about money? And I made a very, very conscious decision. I'm going to earn money from serving the deen so that I can serve the deen full time. Because the alternative is I earn money however I can. A large chunk of my day is gone in that, and then I serve the deen part-time. To me, that reduces my impact, that reduces my reward, that reduces my service. So I don't have a problem with taking a salary for my time and for my effort, but I will consider what I am giving voluntarily. So I'll do more. I'll go beyond my role, beyond my job, do some more stuff voluntarily for the sake of my ikhlas and for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I want to be able to serve the deen full time. That is why I say that this choice needs to be in front of every single Darul Uloom graduate, because it's an important one, right? And therefore, there's one option is careers that align with you as a talib al-ilm, right? And careers that are just careers, right? And I've categorized those separately. So chaplaincy, anybody want to add anything here? I'm sure there's things to add. I'm getting a bit tired. Yes, counseling, very, very important. But particularly, I would say, I know people argue about whether there's any such thing, but Islamic counseling, All right, Islamic counselling and therapy. This is an interesting sector. It's a growing sector. It's a very, very important sector, and this is something that you know, if it's an area that if you don't know what you're interested in, it's something worth looking into. All right, so this is where we help people with, basically we help people with their problems, but we're trained to do it, right? But particularly the mental health type problems. All right, there's you know, youth work, okay, but there's a difference between youth work in the mainstream and youth work connected to some sort of Islamic institution. I suppose we can make that distinction. There's very little in terms of Islamic youth work. Again, that's sad. And another important one that goes along with youth work is oh god, completely slipped my mind. Yeah, but that's not a career, akhi. Rehabilitation for addicts is work. It's important work. But how would you say that's, you know, how is that a career? Man, what was it that just came to my mind? It's a really important one. I just lost it. Actually, I have here's one I made earlier. Oh yes, of course. Islamic Academia. So this is where you basically teach Islam in the mainstream. I believe that's still an Islamic service. I would much rather ulama excelled in academia and taught Islam at universities than some Orientalist, basically, who gave half-baked truths and stupid theories. Orientalists come up with the biggest nonsense. Sorry, that was the one. Thank you. S. Charity sector. All right, and appropriately, the charity sector is right at the bottom because it's a big employer nowadays in the Muslim community. But it's, I reckon, to your role as a talib al-ilm, is the one that's least connected, because there's very few roles in the charity sector that require ulama. Yes, if you were a consultant, etc. Of course, Islamic finance, in the Islamic finance sector. Right, there are other things that are available, but they tend to become possible. They tend to become possible with experience. I won't mention them. I'm talking about things kind of that, you know, that you move into from the outset, right? So most likely the Islamic finance sector will require you to do some extra studies, okay, unless you're got the gift of the gab and you can convince people that you know what you're talking about, then maybe you'll get in, but it will require some extra studies. So will landing a job in academia. You probably will have to do a master's and a PhD. So you know, extra studies required. Okay, let's move on, right? You get the idea, right? I'm not really, you know, I'm not giving you, I told you I'm not giving you career advice. Otherwise, there'd be people here from each one of these sectors presenting. So that's not the point. It's just to generally lay it out. Okay, what alternative forms of service can a talib al-ilm pursue post-graduation? Now, before you answer before we fill this in, right, look at the last one. And this, wow, there's 30 people still here. Subhanallah, well done, guys, mashallah. Guys, okay, so all right, so either like you guys have nothing better to do, or this is become interesting. Okay, do you understand what I'm getting at? So let's look at this trajectory, right? What is the career of a talib al-ilm as a talib al-ilm? You remember what I did there? Talib al-ilm, ilm, service of ilm, teaching, preaching, ta'lim, tarbiyah, tazkiyah, that, right? Then your career-wise, job, earning money, we're moving to that. And I really wanted to talk about relationship with money first, but the time is an issue. And we came up with these, right? The next category is what alternative forms of service can a talib al-ilm pursue post-graduation? Because if it's service-based, then then there is a possibility of making it something that is virtuous. Put it this way, right? Here you have the perfect scenario, right? You have multiple layers of virtue. You have khidmah of the deen. So you grow in knowledge. You're earning a livelihood for your family. All ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So you've got these like nurun ala nur, multiple layers, right? Of goodness. Here I've focused on service-based careers, where you may not necessarily be doing something that's directly tied into your knowledge, to your ilmi background, but you're serving, you're in service. So now you have, I'm fulfilling the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and earning a livelihood, but also I'm serving people, right? And so that's one. And finally, it's anything I can do to earn a livelihood. So this is now you're just fulfilling the obligation of earning a livelihood, or the necessity of earning a livelihood. If it, service, no service, doesn't matter, right? I just need a career, right? I need a successful career. I need to earn a certain amount of money. That's the kind of outlook. And I'm gradually moving from one to the next progressively. I'm doing it deliberately because I am trying to say, guys, there is a preference here, and I hope you get that. Okay, so what would you say falls into this category? Start with things that don't require any further studies. That you could maybe apply for it straight away. So I'm just going to put down. Somebody mentioned regulatory boards like HMC, etc. Yeah, we've got muazzin and stuff. I just put it under masjid, right? There is something that I can add here, right? And that's what I would call independent work. This is really, really important. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. This did come to my mind, actually. Independent work, right? And this is where you're kind of self-employed. You work for yourself, right? And this is where we talk about, we can go into authorship. We can go into translating. Translating is actually, like I did that. And like, depending on which publisher you're with, it's good money. And also you can become your own translator and publish your own book. And things like Launch Good and stuff like that. Crowdfunding is an amazing opportunity. One of my students has just launched a book that he's written, and he's setting up the whole pre-order system based on Launch Good. Brilliant. That's amazingly creative, right? So authorship, translating, and I would say entrepreneurship. I can never spell that right. Preneurship. Whoa, subhanallah. Sorry, I'm being silly, I'm being a bit childish, but I actually managed to spell that right first time. Okay, so entrepreneurship but by entrepreneurship, I kind of mean business where you entrepreneurship and creativity, right? Where you're using your creativity, but sort of in a way that still remains in the Islamic sector. So it could be selling books, using your passion for books and making money out of that. It could be Islamic products, merchandise. It could be on some sort of online business where because all of this, like I have a vision to do things like that, because it's a great. One of my teachers, Shaykh himself, used to say, if you ever go into business and do something that's going to do business in products that will benefit people. So what better than products that will benefit people in their deen? Next is products that will benefit people generally in their life, and that I would say comes under here, right? That would go under here, business, right? well, entrepreneurship. Sorry, I was talking about entrepreneurship there. That would go under here. Just generally, right? If you can't do if you want to do any other career outside of the Islamic system, and it's just about making money, then do business, but do business in an area that serves people's needs, right? So the most obvious ones are things like food, clothing, etc., right? Like, you know, like there's not a single international Muslim supermarket. Why is that? Because we don't understand the idea of connecting business and entrepreneurship with need and necessity, fulfilling necessity through business, right? So really, yeah, thank you. Somebody bought it though. Somebody else built it up. But yeah, you're right. Thank you. We have Asda now. Well done. Well done for pointing that out. Should have remembered that. Yeah, so writing Islamic books for kids, all of that stuff, I would say goes under that last one that I forgot to mention, but did finally put it in. So entrepreneurship in a kind of service space. Part of it is kind of social entrepreneurship, but really what I'm talking about is finding a business niche that services people's needs. It also means that if you deal with people's needs, then you're not going to go bust because of COVID. Okay, so anyway, it's just something to put out there. And now we can move into, so here we're talking about teaching, mainstream teaching. I was going to say categorize it by putting in things that don't require any further study, but too late for that. We're running out of time. We're out of time. So mainstream teaching, so primary school teaching, etc. So primary, secondary, sixth form, right? And so on. And sometimes you could land a job in a school and then work your way up. Okay. I would include in this things like social care, health, and medicine. Is that right? NHS, I suppose. NHS, medical, what's the word? Farmer, what do they call them? Pharmacists. So pharmacy. So these are all, now, can you see what the issue is here? These are all service-based industries, but you're having to shift, you're having to move away, right? But these are good examples of respectable ways of earning incomes, but you are going to have to. Probably the one here that doesn't require additional study is probably social care. It's possible to land a job in something like this as you are, if you're clever and you're good at job hunting, you're good at interviews and so on. My intention really today isn't about telling you how to job hunt, right? But just to lay things out a little bit. But the only way to find a job is to aggressively look. Simple as that. When I say aggressively, I'm talking like a proper maniac, like sending off. Like, in order to find a job successfully, you have to work 9 to 5 every day looking for a job. Guaranteed you'll find one. I guarantee you. 9 to 5 every day looking for a job. What you're every day, you're making applications, responding to applications every day, every single day. So seek, apply, respond. Seek, apply, respond. Seek, apply, respond. Prepare for interviews, understand the role, etc., etc. And part of your time, build up your skill set, right? Another way to make sure that you get in, that a career kicks off, since we're talking about this, is number one, don't shy away from voluntary opportunities. Take volunteer roles in professional companies and institutions, and pursue apprenticeships. Use your time, your career will take off. Right? One of my closest friends, is probably the highest serving civil servant who is also a alim. He's a senior civil servant, 6-figure salary, etc., etc. His career kicked off. All he had is GCSEs and his Darul Uloom certificate. That's it. But his career kicked off because he did 6 months voluntary work at a reputable charity. Okay, inshallah. I don't know. What else would you say falls under this category? I'm going to finish, by the way. So yes, we can do a part 2 and we can talk about other things, but I was going to finish off with this. But if anybody can think of anything in the last slide, then please do. There isn't that much. What I'm trying to say is I'm trying to encourage everybody to try to think of careers in an idealistic way for as much as you can. Failing that, what other career options are there to earn a livelihood? Anything and everything, right? But, so what if in order to earn a livelihood, you're cabbing? So what? So what? Right? But I'm going to say, always be open to entrepreneurship and business, because it's sunnah, and because, okay, you can fail, it's a risk, but if you make it, you may very, very quickly find yourself serving the deen again, because you can. And even if you can't do it with your knowledge, you'll be able to do it with your money. Okay. That's it. Anything and everything, you guys can give whatever, food industry, etc., etc. Yeah, I mean, the list now becomes endless. There's nothing wrong with doing whatever needs to be done in order to feed your family or in order to start your family. Sometimes you do whatever you can get your hands on, right? And then you save a bit of money. If you can stay economically active before you're married, then chances are you'll save quite a lot of money, right? And that can become a springboard to something, an investment, and so on. But one thing I think goes without saying, right? You have to constantly develop yourself. But if you can, please stay connected to your knowledge. And if you feel that, no, I'm passionate about something else, it's okay. But don't disconnect yourself with your knowledge, which I would say is your primary background, the one for which you're accountable on the Day of Judgment. This idea of hujjatun laka or hujjatun alayk. Anyway, any questions? Anything? Inshallah, I've taken up way more time than I had anticipated. This took a lot longer, but is this useful? Yes, it will be available to view later. Inshallah. All right. So one of the brothers will, I'm sure, sort it out and clean it out and put it up on the YouTube channel for everyone to view. Okay. Quite a lot of people attended in the end, so jazakumullah khairan. You make me feel a lot better. It's always good to, do these things with people. But I hope that was useful. I wasn't sure about this, I wasn't sure about how to do this. I actually have the slides to a previous actual careers event. But I felt that the correct format for that would be to bring in people from those careers. And that's not what I was trying to do here. How do you know what to specialize in? The ideal way to do it is to cast a wide net, right? Dabble in different things. Use your time, man. Some of you are young, you're not married yet. Use your time, right? Cast a wide net, try out different things, right? So essentially finding a passion is about seeking it, and seeking it is looking. You have to search, right? One other thing I would say about passion is that whatever you do it with a passion. Now here I want to focus on one thing, and there's still 27 so most of you are still here, so I'm going to say this and you have to bear with me, right? I'm going to go back to maktab education. Now if you draw a parallel, right, you got maktab education, and probably the equivalent of that in the mainstream sector is teaching primary, correct? Teaching primary. Now, when somebody becomes a primary school teacher, they have a degree, maybe, most likely they'll train as a primary school teacher, then they will remain a primary school teacher for the rest of their lives, right? And they will try to grow in that sector, in primary education, most likely. They'll become they'll end up in some sort of management role, become a head of year group, or they'll become a subject head, or they'll become some sort of specialist, or they'll end up in management and eventually grow further and become like an assistant head or deputy head and a head. That's your career trajectory. And eventually beyond that is, you'll become a consultant. What is the equivalent of that? My question to all of you is, what is the equivalent of that in the maktab sector, in the maktab, madrasa, teaching children sector? What is the equivalent? No? No, right. No, I don't mean any of those things. So let me try to break this down, right? I should get on with it now. So maktab, so the first thing I want to say is, first thing I want to draw a parallel with is a primary school teacher is dedicated to teaching children. Please don't go into maktab education, and most of you will. Please don't go into maktab education half-heartedly, like it's something that you just want to do for a little while, earn an extra 50 quid, 100 quid a week, and then as soon as you can dump it. As soon as you want to dump it. Please, if you engage in maktab education, it's an amana. Do it properly, do it to the best of your ability, do the best you can with those children. Those children are going to remember you and what you did for them, and the education you provided them, the tarbiyah you provided them, the effort you put in for the rest of their lives. And you would have imprinted upon them either a positive image of Islam, Muslims and ulama, or a negative image of Islam, Muslims and ulama, right? Now, the next point is this idea of career trajectory. Most people won't do maktab work full time, but a lot of people are able to fit it in to their lifestyle and sustain it, and then there's possibility of becoming, like having various roles, right? Perhaps setting up your own maktab, gaining experience, becoming a consultant in that sector, becoming a teacher trainer in that sector. It's good to be creative in that sector, but also, if you want to be, please, if you end up doing maktab education long term because you've just managed to fit it in, you have a nice little kind of weekend madrasa arrangement, and you continue doing it, you like it. If you do that, please invest in it and develop yourself, right? Do courses, do some teacher training. Even if you don't do it professionally, kind of, read up on it, or bring some insight, get some insight into your maktab, get some training into your maktab, develop people so that the children have the best possible education. Okay, inshallah. It's an important message because everybody does it. And Ilm Ta'amal did, similar to what Shaykh Hassan did at the curriculum level. So when Shaykh Hassan Ali, before he launched Safar Academy, the idea behind it actually we came up with together. So when he first graduated, we were classmates. And when we first graduated, we started teaching maktab together. And a lot of the development, a lot of the ideas and stuff we came up with together, and then he took it forward, and I shifted towards adult education, a secondary education at first, followed by Ibrahim College, and he stuck to maktab education. But he's a very good example of somebody who stuck with it and did it well. So not only does he develop the textbooks and so on, but he runs several maktabs, right? So please, like, if you do it properly. According to Ilm Ta'amal and their research, 70% of British Muslim children get maktab educated, either in the masjid or in a private maktab or privately tutored. My contribution to that statistic is to say probably 80% of that is poor. And in the olden days, I used to think 80% of it is poor, and the solution is English-speaking, British educated maktab teachers. After 22 years out in the community, I am now convinced that the British educated kind of Darul Uloom graduate type maktab teachers are just as bad, right? And they have less of an excuse because they don't have a language disadvantage that the teachers from back home have. And sadly, most of what I see is laziness, right? We don't want to prepare. We don't want to put in the extra work. It's a side dish. It's just something that I do on the side. It's a bit of extra pocket money. We have to change this because we will have to answer for it on the day of judgment. And I focus on this because everybody does it. Because as in, not everybody does the bad stuff. Not everybody's lazy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying most people, the overwhelming majority of Darul Uloom graduates teach maktab. So if all of us up our game, imagine the impact on the next generation. All right, inshallah. That's it. That's something that I left out, actually, that I thought was important to say. Okay, if there's nothing else, let's stop there. Jazakumullah khairan. We'll put the video up soon. And I don't know, until the next time, we'll do another event, inshallah, soon. I'd like to do these things regularly and just continue engaging with brothers and sisters. And I actually enjoy it, to be honest. This is pretty good, right? And also, I don't know, maybe I was thinking today that maybe for future events, those of you who have already registered for an event, we'll just send you the details, because we know who you are now. We'll just send it to you, okay, inshallah. But we'll try. But if you're not on the Telegram group, then please join it, because we have some great discussions there. All right, and we can continue some of these conversations. In fact, this webinar happened because of the discussions that happen on the Telegram group. Okay, inshallah. I am in favor. I think there's a sister who's asking, can maktab be started as a weekend program? Yeah, I prefer weekend-based maktabs. So at one point, I was involved in 7 or 8 maktabs consecutively as part of a large maktab project, and almost all of them were weekend-based. And my children attended weekend-based maktabs, and wallahi al-azim, I would never send them to a 5-day maktab. Never. It's just much, much better. Their mental health is much better. They're relaxed more, and in a short amount of time, they achieve more. So I'm a big fan of a weekend model, right? And the most I would do is perhaps weekends and maybe 1 or 2 weekdays if they're doing tahfeed or something else on top. But I'm not a big fan of 5-day maktab. In fact, one or two of our maktabs, we went for an evening model, but we used the same number of hours. So our weekend model was 6 hours, and the evening one, we still went for 3 evenings as opposed to all 5. So that's how I think of it. Because it's too much for children. 5 days a week, school followed by, come on, man, it's torture. I did it. I used to hate it. Maktab was torture. When I was a child, I'm talking about 1980s, right? It was awful. It was an awful experience. It's not a positive memory. The one thing I want my children to have is positive memories of Islamic education. It's a basic objective of maktab. I want children to remember that maktab education was manageable. It was okay. It was reasonable. I want them to remember that it was fun, that teachers were pleasant, it was engaging, and they learned things, right? And it was just as good or similar to school. If you can't give them a positive memory, then we're failing them. We're failing those children if we can't give them positive memories of Islamic education. Please remember that. SEN Maktab, very, very important. They're very difficult to do, but I applaud anyone that's trying to do it. Allah bless you. Please keep doing it. Absolutely important. Basically, maktabs for special needs children. There was somebody who tried to set one up for autistic children here in East London. He passed away, rahmatullahi alayhi. And similarly for children with other special educational needs, it's such a big need. Every community should have one. It's a type of fard kifaya, right? But we're struggling with the normal ones. But if you recognize the need, maybe do it. It's definitely necessary, and people will pay for it. Right, even probably for SEN type maktabs, you might even get funding, right? Because it's such a niche. In the case of maktabs on weekends, how long should it be max? I mean, I would say I've tried a 6-hour model, 3 hours Saturday, 3 hours Sunday. right? And some of we added extracurricular activities to some of them. So we used to have scouts and stuff like that, you know, sometimes in addition to the 3 hours. But we did 6 hours because we felt it was enough. It was sufficient, right? If children are taught well. Brother Zakaria, yeah, that's excellent, man. That's really good news. Allah bless you. And, you know, please keep the, you know, like set it up in a way that you can share your best practices and so on, inshallah, and take as much help and advice as you can from people who know the area. 1.5 hours for 4 days. Yeah, I mean, look, it's, if you can make it work, great. But, you know, the point is to give the children the best possible outcomes with the less amount of burden when it comes to maktab, because they've already had a full day at school. All right, and we don't need to try. They don't have to become alamas in maktab. They have to become good Muslims. You understand? We're not trying to make ulama, right? I'm not even a big fan of maktab-based tahfidh, although I know a lot of people do it and they do it really successfully. But I don't think it's necessary. For me, what's important is necessary education that ensures the preservation of the deen of children, the future generations. Anything on top of that is a bonus. If people can make it work, mashallah, right? What's important is that they get a good education. It's an education that they have positive memories of, that they enjoy, and that they may even want to continue. Okay, and if possible, I would like maktab education to also continue into adulthood. I'd like maktabs to consider continuing provision post 16 for boys and for girls. That's another thing. But I don't know if that's something, if you're the right audience for this, but just keep that in mind, because letting children go at 14, 15, to me, is one of the biggest blunders of the Muslim community, because we let them go when they're the most vulnerable, when they need us the most. Okay. So I'm now planning to fill that gap, inshallah, with a mentoring program. So keep an eye out for that. It's just something, you know, because it's so bad at the moment. There's hardly anything out there. One of our teachers told us to do 2-hour maktab, but the tahfidh part should be maximum ½ hour. Rest should be for fiqh and adab. Yeah, perhaps. Allahu alam. If you can make it work, why not? Look, be creative. Be creative, because a lot can be achieved through creativity when it comes to teaching children. And remember, serious education doesn't even have to start until they're 7 years old. Most of early maktab years can be fun and games. You understand? Teaching through fun, you know, and why not? All right? Okay, inshallah. Yeah, pre-teen and onwards. I would say vulnerability in terms of children's age begins at 12, because that's when you have the onset of puberty for boys. Girls, you know, actually the problems begin at a similar age with boys, even though they may technically be baligha. But and it all obviously depends on environment and upbringing and school and all of that stuff. But hormonally and in terms of curiosity around issues of sex and sexuality, exposure to pornography, getting interested in smartphones and gaming, etc. And very, very dangerous, they begin to start thinking about complex issues that are Islamically questionable, or that cast a doubt in Islam. So when they start to learn aspects of science that clash with Islam, and when they start to observe certain social differences between us and between non-Muslims, and start to become attracted to the kind of non-Muslim way of life and so on. So these are very, very vulnerable times. So whether you're a parent or whether you're a maktab teacher or a community leader or etc., you know, these are times to really, really be wary of. Okay. Yeah, but Islamic social clubs and youth clubs are, I think it's a really good idea, and I've thought about it for a while. Very difficult to do, man. Very difficult to do. The only way to realistically be able to set up a social club, youth club type of provision for the Muslim community is for it to happen within existing premises, existing infrastructure, i.e. masajid. It's the only realistic way to do it. Otherwise, how in the world are you going to get something like that paid for? Because all of this costs money. All of this costs money. Okay, inshallah. But absolutely it needs to be done. But I haven't got an answer to how. Okay, inshallah. Unless you can, you know, if you can get something like that funded by the government, why not, man? Go for it. Okay. If you want to make lessons engaging for children and for teens in particular, just let them have some fun. You know, make it very engaging. Don't make it one-sided. Don't talk too much. You know, let them talk. Get to know them. Have small class groups. Do lots of one-to-one work. Don't overburden them. Don't try to over-teach. You know, I teach teenagers at the moment. I love it. Right? Love it. You know, they're really, really curious bunch and so on. But I keep it engaging, keep it friendly. I'm obviously much older. But alhamdulillah, you know, it works. My class is 13 to 18. So quite a range. But it's really good. And you have to engage people. You can't treat teenagers like they're dumb and teach them like really, really simple stuff. They're studying chemistry, biology, physics at school, right? And you're like trying to dumb down Islamic concept. You need to engage with what they're learning in school and make it stimulating, basically. That's what needs to happen. And you need to always let them ask, let them question, let them challenge. Allow yourself to be challenged as a teacher as well. All right, inshallah. Get to know them. If they don't talk too much, get to know them. Get to know what's going on. Get to know them. Make it one-to-one. Make it one-to-one. Take it outside of the classroom. Try to get to know the person. Right? You know, make it a little bit more social. You've got to get to know your students. Not everybody is going to talk, and you have to use. Sometimes you have to use carrots. Sometimes you have to use. You know, you have to basically figure the person out and then adapt the solutions. Right? You understand the problem, then provide the solution, isn't it? Generic solutions don't always work. Sometimes you have to tailor it to the person and get to know what's going on with their life. All right. Obviously, your maktab might not facilitate that, but that's where I think, as a teacher, I think this is where your voluntary contribution comes in. That bit of extra concern for an individual student is where, actually, this is where our ikhlas starts to show and shine through. And probably those are the things that are going to count most for us on the Day of Judgment, because for the rest of it, we're getting paid. All right. And it's very difficult to get your ikhlas absolutely spot on for something that you're getting money for. All right. And hopefully we are all being immensely, generously rewarded. But are we checking our intention? Okay. And it's that extra effort that actually, you know, it kind of sets things apart in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Anyway, I don't mind carrying on, but you know, there's still 24 people here. Wow, well done, mashallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Allah bless you. And let's keep talking. Look, join the Telegram group, right? Join the Telegram group. If you're not on there, I'm assuming.